Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. This video is in defense of Islam. It is a response to another video, and I won't say the name of the video. I will just include a link to that video in the description box so that you can watch it for yourself. In fact, you should probably watch that video before you watch this video. So the link is in the description box. I'm going to go to the very heart of the issue in this debate. And that's the issue of terrorism. Islam condemns terrorism. Islam does not support the killing of innocent civilians. We often hear these quotes from the Qur'an that people take out of context, quotes that deal with war, quotes from the Qur'an dealing with war. One has to understand that Muslims were oppressed in Arabia. They were boycotted against, they were brutally attacked, and they were ostracized as a people. And eventually the Muslims were forced to leave their homeland. They were forced to go initially to Ethiopia, and then eventually they ended up going to Medina. And after years of suffering through violent oppression, eventually the Muslims took up arms and defended themselves, as all people with intelligence do. So the Qur'an governs all aspects of life, including war. So when people quote verses dealing with war, they need to understand that context, that the Muslims were an oppressed group of people and that they were fighting for their very survival. Now, this notion that Islam condones terrorism is completely false. Islam views human life as sacred and precious. And in order to prove that point, I'm going to cite a few verses from the Quran. This first verse comes right after verses that deal with the story of Cain and Abel. And I won't go into the story of Cain and Abel. Many of you are familiar with that story of a brother killing another brother out of jealousy. But in Surah 5, Ayat 32, it says, "On that account, we ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone slew a person, unless it be for murder or for spreading mischief in the land, it would be as if he slew the whole people. And if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the whole people." So that tells you how sacred life is in Islam. One life is viewed as the life of a whole people. That's how precious life is. So obviously, killing innocent people violates decency. It violates the religion of Islam. Now, in terms of waging war, there are rules to war, as I said before. Ayat 190 in Surah 2 says, "Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. For Allah loveth not the transgressors." So there are limits to war. And killing innocent civilians is a limit in war. Those people in San Bernardino were innocent. They didn't harm anyone. They were civilians, innocent people just enjoying a holiday party. They didn't deserve to die. Their death was, unjustifiable. There's no rational justification for it. There's no rational way to explain what those people did when they committed those acts of terrorism. But clearly they don't, those actions weren't in accord with Islam, because all life is sacred in Islam and there are limits that people cannot transgress. Those people were completely innocent. People in Paris at a concert enjoying music. People in Paris at a restaurant enjoying food. People in Paris at a sporting event enjoying the festivities. Those people were innocent. They didn't have anything to do with any foreign policies of their government. Those were innocent civilians, and there is no justification or rationalization for the killing of those innocent people. And most Muslims around the world understand that. Most Muslims around the world condemn the brutal acts of murder and terrorism committed by ISIS and other terrorist groups. That's why you have distinguished Muslims all over the world condemning this terrorism, and distinguished Muslims right here in America condemning this terrorism, this brutality, this barbarism. Those people who committed those acts of terrorism, they weren't truly acting in the name of Islam. They were acting in the name of their own self-interest, in the name of their own politics. I'm going to cite another ayat from the Qur'an, and that's Surah 17, ayat 33. Nor take life, which Allah has made sacred, except for just cause. And if anyone is slain wrongfully, we have given his heir authority to demand qisas, or to forgive. But let him not exceed bounds in the matter of taking life, for he is helped by the law. Again, life is sacred. And it tells, this ayat says, don't take life that Allah has made sacred except for just cause. There's no justification. Again, there was no just cause for the killing of innocent people. Often in the news you hear about suicide bombings. You hear these extremists, you hear news stories about extremists blowing themselves up, professing to do so in the name of Islam. Such actions violate Islam because the Qur'an commands the believers not to kill themselves. And to bring home that point, I'll cite Surah 4, ayat 29. Nor kill or destroy yourselves, for verily Allah has been to you most merciful. Most merciful. So those are just a few examples of how life is sacred in Islam. A few examples of how there are limits that can't be transgressed in Islam. These are examples of how those terrorists, they violate everything that Islam is all about. Now in this video that I'm responding to, this person suggested that Muslims, or that Islam is racist, that Arabs hate black people. And they kind of implied that this is what Islam is all about. And this is a reason why no black person should be a Muslim. He mentioned how Muslims use a slur against, Arab Muslims use a slur against black Muslims, calling them slaves. And I want to be clear. I mean, there are racist people around the world. There are racist people in all types of religions. There are racist people in all types of political systems. So racism transcends religion, it transcends political ideology. Racism is everywhere in society. And yes, there are racist Arabs and racist people who profess to be Muslim. But such attitudes violate the teachings of Islam. They violate the holy book of Islam, the Qur'an. And I just want to bring home this point by citing a ayat from the Qur'an, and that's Surah 49:13. It says, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that ye despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous of you. And Allah has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all things. Now that makes it clear that there is no racial superiority in Islam. One's status is not determined by one's race or one's class. One's status in Islam is determined by one's righteousness. So these people that use racial slurs against black people, they are in violation of Islam. And if you are to judge a religion, you have to judge it by the holy text of that religion and the actual teachings of that religion. Because often you have people who profess to believe one thing, but they behave in a way that is contrary to what they profess to believe in. And that is the case when you have situations involving racism in the Muslim world. It's naive to suggest that some Muslims are not racist, but those races are violating the religion they profess to believe in. And I'll continue by citing from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his very last sermon. He said, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over a black, or a black has no superiority over a white, except by piety and good action. Again, piety, righteousness, good deeds, those are the determining factors of someone's worth as a human being in Islam. It's not measured by the pigment of somebody's skin. It's not measured by how much money they have, how many things they've acquired in life. It's measured by their character. It's measured by their integrity, by their righteousness, by their God consciousness. That's how you measure the worth of a man or a woman. So these people who are racist, they are in violation of Islam, just like the people who commit brutal acts of terrorism against innocent civilians. They are violating Islam. And I just want to make this clear. As I said in a prior video, you can't judge an entire religion or group of people based on the actions of a few individuals or groups of people within the larger group. There are over 1 billion Muslims in the world. You can't judge that entire religion based on the acts of a few misguided, um, completely astray terrorists. You can't judge the religion based on their savage actions, their brutality. And we should understand this. We understand the discrimination as a people, African Americans in this country. We understand how we are judged as a group based on the actions of a few individuals. We're profiled as a group. You don't see them judging white Christians by the same standard. They don't profile all white Christians because the man in Colorado Springs attacked a Planned Parenthood office. They don't say, well, let's profile all white men because of that. They don't judge Christians by the conduct of the KKK, an organization that professes to be Christian, an organization that uses an organization that uses a cross as their symbol, they don't judge all Christians based on that. They judge them as individuals, and that's what should happen in Islam. That's what should happen with respect to Muslims. Muslims should be judged as individuals. They should not be condemned as a group. The terrorists should be condemned, but you should not condemn an entire religion. The next thing that's mentioned in this person's video, they talk about slavery. And they use this as a reason why, to basically say that black people shouldn't support Islam because Muslims practice slavery or Islam supports slavery. And then they try to suggest that I said that Islam forbids slavery. First of all, I never said that Islam forbids slavery. I said that there are many examples of how Muslims atone for sins by freeing slaves. And I cited the Qur'an, and there I'm going to provide a few quotes from the Qur'an that give examples of how it's a great thing to free slaves. That's something that was recognized in Islam. And I'll discuss that a little bit later. But the point is this: slavery is not confined to any one civilization or any one group of people. It's not confined to any one religion. Many great civilizations practice slavery. Whether those civilizations were African civilizations, like the civilizations in Egypt and Sudan and West Africa, whether it's Timbuktu and other great civilizations founded by Africans, and just other civilizations around the world. Whether we're talking about Europe, the Greeks, the Romans, whether we're talking about the Middle East and other parts of the world, Asia, China, slavery has been a practice among human beings. And so if someone is going to say, well, you shouldn't practice a religion that has a history of slavery, then there would be no religion for anyone to practice. Because even if you look at traditional African religions, it was Africans who enslaved their own people. Africans practiced slavery before you even had the influence of Europeans or Arabs. In fact, Africans participated in our enslavement. Whether it was our enslavement under Arabs or under Europeans, you had Africans participating in that slave trade. They traded slaves to Arabs, and they also, they engaged in other trades with Arabs, but they included the slave trade. They would actually sell their own people to Arabs and to white people and to others. And they had slaves. Again, great civilizations like Egypt had slaves. So what are we going to do? Say, well, I can't recognize the greatness of Kemet, which is, the true name for Egypt, because they practice slavery. I can't recognize even the greatness of America because America practiced slavery. I'm going to throw out the Constitution because the Americans, the founders of this country, practiced slavery. That sounds ridiculous. And I don't support slavery. I'm just saying that slavery has been with us throughout history. Slavery is documented in the Bible, the book that many people go by in this country. Slavery wasn't condemned in the Bible, and it's not necessarily condemned in the Qur'an. But as I said, freeing slaves was looked upon as an act of piety. And that was my point in my video. And I'm going to go on to cite a few examples from the Qur'an. There's a surah in the Qur'an that talks about the path that is steep. That is the path where someone is striving for righteousness, striving to be a better human being, striving to be God conscious, striving to be righteous. They're going up that steep path, this path that is not easy. And in the Quran, in Surah 90, ayahs 12 and 13, it says, "And what will explain to you the path that is steep? It is freeing the bondsman." So that is telling you that freeing slaves is a righteous act in Islam. And then it goes on to say, here's another ayat that goes on to talk about how one can repent for one's sin by freeing a slave. It says, "Never should a believer," and this is Surah 4, ayat 92. It says, "Never should a believer kill a believer except by mistake. And whoever kills a believer by mistake, it is ordained that he should free a believing slave." And there are other ayats in the Quran that talk about freeing slaves, freeing them as a form of repentance. And I won't cite those other ayats, but anyone can research them online. And I may include some of these ayats or all of them in the description to this video so that you can read them for yourself. And today is the age of information. I mean, anyone can go online and they can read the Qur'an for free. They can go to a public library and read it for themselves, and they can read these actual ayats for themselves so that they can get better understanding instead of falling into the trap of ignorance and spreading hatred and lies. And I just need to add this point about slavery. Slavery in the Muslim world wasn't confined to just enslaving black people. Many different people of different nationalities were slaves in the Muslim world. You had Arab slaves, you had white slaves, you had slaves of other nationalities. So it wasn't initially a racist uh, institution. It was something that included people of different races. And it's also important to understand that slavery in the Muslim world was different from slavery in America. No other form of slavery was more brutal than American slavery. If you just look at the number of people who died during the Middle Passage alone, that makes it clear that no other form of slavery is comparable to American slavery. Next, I want to deal with this whole lie, this myth that Allah is a moon god. This is a lie put out here by some extremist Christians to basically separate Islam from the other Aramaic traditions. And I'll include links to the sources for the information that I'm providing in this video. But let's be clear. Muslims do not worship idols. They don't worship stones. They don't worship statues. We worship the true and living God. We worship the same God that Adam prayed to. We worship the same God that Abraham prayed to, the same God that Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son for. We worship the same God that guided Moses and Aaron. We worship the same God that Jesus prayed to. Peace be upon all of these great messengers. We worship the same God. In order to understand Allah, you have to understand the word, what it means. Allah is Arabic for the God. If you open a Christian Bible, they will refer to God as Allah in that Arabic Bible. If you open an Arabic Bible and you read it, in that Arabic Bible, they refer to God as Allah because Allah simply means the God. There is no God but the God. And that's what Muslims say. That's the declaration of faith of the Muslims. In order to understand who Allah is, you have to understand his attributes. Allah has 99 attributes. And they make it clear that Allah is not the moon. Allah is not a moon God. Allah is all-knowing, almighty, all-hearing, all-seeing. He's the beneficent, the merciful. Muslims don't worship any object. Muslims don't worship the constellations, the moon or stars, or even human beings. We worship the one who created the moon, the one who created the stars, the one who created the earth and everything on it and everything that exists. That's who we worship. We don't worship a moon. And we certainly don't worship any crude idol. And to bring home this point, I'm just going to read from the Qur'an, Surah 41, Ayat 37. Among his signs are the night and the day, and the sun and the moon. Prostrate not to the sun and the moon, but prostrate to Allah who created them, if it is him ye wish to worship. And then there are other ayats that just point out how the moon is just used as a measurement of time in Islam. The moon is not an object to worship. And I'll just read from one ayat, and this ayat says, they ask thee concerning the new moons. Say they are but signs to mark fixed periods of time in the affairs of men and for pilgrimage. So that just makes it clear that the moon is not an object to be worshipped by Muslims. Muslims don't worship a moon god. And some have said, well, the word Allah existed before Islam, and they use that to say that Allah was a pagan god. First of all, Muslims don't believe that Islam started with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We believe that all the prophets of Allah were Muslims and that they were in submission to Allah, which is Islam. And before Islam came, yes, people used the word Allah because even the pagans recognized that there was a supreme being. But the problem with the pagans is they gave Allah partners. They said that there were lesser gods that they had to consult in order to reach the true and living God. So they worship idols in addition to the one true God. And the Qur'an has many ayats that point this out, how the pagans, they recognized that there was a supreme God, but they also worship idols as associates to God, as intercessors to God. So again, the word Allah means the God. It's not a moon god. It's the God that all the great prophets worship and pray to. Now, I just want to conclude on this note. This person went on to say that the proposals presented by Donald Trump don't affect African American Muslims. He went on to suggest that this is just for foreign Muslims. That's just false. Just across the board is false. Donald Trump has talked about closing mosques. That will affect African American Muslims in this country. He's talked about requiring Muslims to carry special identifications. That will affect all Muslims, including African American Muslims. He's talked about registration of Muslims, or he's expressed an openness to these ideas of registration of Muslims and identification for Muslims. That will affect all Muslims, even African American Muslims. Donald Trump has talked about increasing surveillance of Muslim communities. That will affect all Muslims, including African American Muslims. And we can see the reality of that if we just look to what happened in New York, how they monitored all Muslim communities, a lot of Muslim communities. And many Muslims who were African American attended the mosques that were under surveillance. They were members of the communities that were monitored by the authorities. And we should be the last people condoning this stuff, given our history as a people, our history of being monitored by the FBI, when we look at what happened with the counterintelligence program in this country, how they killed black leaders under such a program and jailed many black leaders under the COINTEL program and had black organizations destroying each other. We should be the last people advocating increased surveillance of communities. Also, this man's rhetoric, Donald Trump's rhetoric, affects all Muslims as well because it creates an atmosphere of hatred against Muslims. We see example after example around this country of Muslims being harassed by people, Muslims being attacked by people, Muslims being penalized and oppressed by ignorant people who have bought into this narrative that all Muslims are terrorists. You have Muslims being beaten. You have Muslims being attacked and followed with guns. You have people protesting outside of mosques with guns to express their hatred against Muslims. And this happens because people like Donald Trump fuel the flames of hatred. It happens because people out of their ignorance and fear assume that all Muslims are terrorists simply because of the actions of a few misguided people. So yeah, this is a situation that does affect African American Muslims. And we should learn from history. We should learn from the history of the Holocaust. We should learn from the history of the Japanese internment camps. We should learn from the history of McCarthyism in this country. See, today it's the Muslims, but tomorrow it could be your group. Tomorrow it could be your group. As I said in my prior video, I'm sure that some Muslims, when they heard Donald Trump saying derogatory things about those Mexican immigrants, they probably turned a blind eye to it. But then when he started talking about Muslims, they probably woke up at that point. They probably woke up at that point. Because we have to remember in Nazi Germany, the first people that went to those concentration camps were communists and social democrats. Those are the ones who went to those concentration camps first. Hitler's political rivals. And I'm sure that some Jews who were in the upper classes, they probably felt, well, this rhetoric won't affect me, until Hitler began to disbar all Jewish lawyers, until Hitler began to ban Jewish publications and fire Jews from schools and universities, and seize Jewish property, and then just round up Jews and put them in concentration camps and exterminate them. But then it was too late. And even some of those Nazis who were side by side with Hitler, they probably thought they were safe too, until he turned his back on them and assassinated them. They're examples of Nazi leaders that Hitler took out because he feared that they were competition. So the point is, they come for the Muslims today, they could come for you tomorrow. So wake up. And I just want to say this at the very end. This person suggested that African American Muslims are weak, or don't have the willingness to fight for change like Arab Muslims do. Nothing could be further from the truth. African American Muslims are not terrorists. We're not committing acts of terrorism. We are resisting against injustice in an intelligent way. You can't tell me that black Muslims haven't been courageous in this country when you have a brother like Malcolm X who gave his very life for what he believed in. A brother who spoke boldly and strongly against injustice in this country. You can't tell me that the Muslims don't have courage, don't have heart, don't have a willingness to fight for what they believe in. You obviously are misinformed. You have the example of Muhammad Ali, a brother who was a famous boxer. He had riches and fame, but he was willing to give all that up for what he believed in. He was willing to give it all up and face jail time when he objected to being drafted to fight in the Vietnam War. So you can't tell me about sacrifice. You can't tell me anything about African American Muslims standing up in this country when you had a bold example of Malcolm X and others. Peace.